Yo, what's good everyone? It's me, it's Jinsula. I hope you're having a good day and welcome to today's Pokemon Go discussion video. Alright, so it's been about a year and a half since we had the remote raid pass nerfs get launched into Pokemon Go. And I really wanted to talk about how I've been perceiving raiding as of late. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about in this video is based on personal experience, but also by talking with a lot of people who play Pokemon Go or used to play Pokemon Go. And I really do think there's a lot of things that Niantic could take away from this video, and I really hope that we as a community continue to voice our concerns with the game so that Niantic makes positive changes. I know a lot of people tend to view my videos as being extremely negative, but I really want to put a spotlight on some of the issues that Pokemon Go players have been feeling, because without doing that, I feel like no progress is ever going to be made. I think that's a very important aspect of having these discussions, so if you're someone who just does not like my content because it's so negative, I really do think that you should take a second look, because being positive about Pokemon Go is totally fine, but I still think it's important that we talk about all of these issues. Alright, so with that said, let's talk about remote raid passes. So, one of the reasons why Niantic made the changes that they did almost a year ago is of course because they want to bring the game back to more exploration-based play. And I've also talked to Niantic regarding the remote raid pass issue, namely Michael Steranka, the game director. By the way, he's a really great guy. I think he's incredibly smart, and Niantic is super lucky to have him on their roster. But when it comes to Pokemon Go and when it comes to remote raid passes, he voiced that the reason why they did the remote raid pass nerf is simply because they were worried that the remote raid passes as they currently were during the pandemic was unsustainable and players would eventually stop raiding. Plus on top of that, he was really concerned that Pokemon Go was moving away from their core mission, which was of course to promote exploration-based play. And to that, I can actually agree. I think remote raid passes are something that causes a lot of players to no longer go outside and play. But at the same time, I feel like everything he talked about regarding remote raid passes causing longevity issues and it wasn't sustainable, I have a hard disagreement with that. And the reason why is because of what we're feeling right now as Pokemon Go players. So something that I've been experiencing as of late, and something that I feel like a lot of Pokemon Go players can relate to, is the fact that, well, when it comes to Pokemon Go's raiding scene, it is completely dead right now. In terms of remote raiding, no one is doing them, and in terms of in-person raiding, it's nowhere near what it used to be before the pandemic, and I think this is something Niantic needs to realize, that when it comes to remote raid passes, they fixed a lot of issues with Pokemon Go that it was feeling for a very long time, and there's no possibility that the game is ever going to return to pre-pandemic levels. I'm going to talk about that. So I talked about how Michael Steranka stated that one of the reasons for them nerfing remote raid passes was for the sake of sustainability, and it was for the sake of longevity. I think the opposite has happened. When it comes to Pokemon Go's raiding scene, it has completely declined. And a big reason for that is because of the nerf to remote raids. I think a lot of people just simply do not go out and do raid battles anymore. I think the only exception is for raid days as well as the Wednesday raid hours, but essentially I don't think there's anyone doing that many in-person raids like they used to. Like, before the pandemic, it was all about in-person raiding, right? And that is of course because we did not have any remote raid passes. So a lot of people would group up, they would coordinate with other players. There would be a lot of discussions happening on Discord over having different raid groups, and people would coordinate and go to raids and complete raids together. And that was something that was really good for Pokemon Go at the time. A lot of people were having a lot of fun, they were meeting a lot of people, they were forming communities, and the raiding scene was robust. There was a lot of people going out and doing a whole bunch of raids. People were very familiar with where the different gyms were located, and people were constantly meeting up and having a good time. And I feel like this is one of the things that Niantic wanted to bring the game back to. I mean, when they introduced remote raid passes, that was as a response to the pandemic, because so many people were locked down, people were not able to go out and raid. They were just simply not allowed to. So Niantic introduced remote raid passes as something to circumvent that, because they need to make money, right? And if people are not buying raid passes, well, Niantic is essentially going to go under because they're not making any revenue. So yeah, remote raid passes being introduced during that time made total sense. But the problem is, I feel like after a certain while, after the pandemic has ended, Niantic tried to bring the game back to how it was before the pandemic. And I really feel like that would have been impossible because, first and foremost, they opened Pandora's box. By introducing remote raid passes into the game, they gave players a taste of what it's like to play the game remotely, so that is something that they are going to naturally prefer. The reason for that is because when it comes to in-person raiding and forming all of those groups, there's a lot of hurdles that they have to jump through in order to do just one raid. Like, you have to form a raid group, you have to join a community, you have to communicate with a lot of players, you need to get along with those players in order to get invited to those raids, and then of course you have to drive out to those raids because every single gym is going to be located in different areas. But when Niantic introduced remote raid passes, suddenly now people are able to do a whole bunch of raids without having to dedicate a lot of time and gas and energy. And I feel like a lot of players definitely preferred that. I myself definitely preferred that. I mean, I really enjoyed how raiding was before the pandemic, but I enjoyed it even more after remote raid passes were introduced. There were a lot of people in rural areas who are now finally able to do raids, and raiding is essentially the crux of everything in Pokemon Go. It is the lifeblood of Pokemon Go. If you do not have any kind of raiding, then Pokemon Go is definitely going to fail. The reason for that is because it is primarily the main source of revenue for Niantic, and on top of that, it's the best way to get some of the best Pokemon in the game. So naturally, people are going to be gravitating towards raid battles, whether it be legendaries, whether it be mega evolutions, or maybe even 3-star and 1-star raids if the Pokemon is really good for PvP. So yeah, players are often going to do raids, but nowadays, because everything is leaning towards in-person raiding, people just simply do not want to raid anymore. I feel like ultimately what the problem is, Niantic did not adjust, because remote raiding was essentially the next step in the evolution of Pokemon Go, and rather than going along with it and designing the game and balancing the game around that, they essentially tried to de-evolve Pokemon Go and go back to a time where people were playing the game very differently. And that's just simply not working. I mean, you could just tell right now, people are just not interested in raiding at all. Like, even remote raiding has seen huge declines. Like, a lot of people that I typically raid with, they just simply do not raid anymore. They're just logging into the game to complete their catch streak of the day and their first spin of the day, and they're not really playing the game. Like, when it comes to the raid battles, they're just simply not interested. Some people will argue that a big reason for that is because of the raid bosses that we've been having. Like, a lot of them are not really that interesting. They're not really good from a gameplay point of view. But I would argue that even in the past, before we had the pandemic, people were still doing raids regardless if it was a relevant Pokemon or not. And then during the pandemic with remote raid passes, it was the same story. People were still raiding even if the boss was not something substantial. That is something that players haven't been doing as of late. People just simply do not care about raid battles. They do not need the rare candies or the rare candy XL. They just do not need the candies for the Pokemon, and they just simply do not care about 100% IVs. So I think Pokemon Go is in a very bad place right now when it comes to raid battles. And I think that's something that Niantic needs to think about because, like I said, raiding is the backbone of Pokemon Go. No matter how you spin it, you need to do raid battles if you want to do PvP, gym battles, all that sort of thing. If you need to complete your Pokedex, you need to do raids because that's the only way you could pick up certain legendaries. So yeah, if I was Niantic, I would be rethinking how they do remote raid passes, and I would be rethinking how they approach raiding in general, because there's so many things in the game that encourages you to do in-person raids. They almost force you to do in-person raids. Coming up, we have Mega Rayquaza Raid Day, and guess what? It is an elite raid day, which means you can't do any of them remotely. You have to go there in person at set periods of time, and it was a very unpopular decision that they made. I mean, a lot of people are up in arms about it, so that should tell you how people feel about in-person raiding. People want Pokemon Go to move forward. They want people to see Pokemon Go evolve and be a whole different game from what it used to be. And the best way that they did that was, of course, with remote raids. And honestly, if it was up to me, I would redo remote raiding entirely. I don't think they have to go back to how exactly it was during the pandemic. One thing I will agree with Michael Steranka and the folks at Niantic is that I do think remote raiding was a little bit overpowered and overtuned beforehand, but it doesn't justify doubling the price of remote raid passes and limiting your daily amount to 5. I think you should be able to do more than 5 remote raid passes every day, and my goodness, they need to reduce the price of remote raid passes. For them to double the cost of remote raid passes, that is not sustainable. What they need to do is meet us in the middle. I think it would be perfectly fine if remote raid passes were, let's say, 125 Pokecoins per pass rather than 200. I think it would be really good for the game if they had different bundles for remote raid passes every so often, and actually drive people to do both kinds of raids. If they want to do remote raids, they have the option to do so, and if they want to do in-person raids, give them good incentives for doing that. But as of right now, they're just kind of locking players into in-person raids, and that's just something that a lot of players are just not interested in. And I really feel like Niantic needs to understand that. Being set in your ways is fine. They need to have different missions for Pokemon Go. They need to have a core philosophy behind Pokemon Go, a singular vision, but they also need to be less stingy. They need to actually listen to the Pokemon Go community, because at the end of the day, we are your paid customers. We're the ones keeping your company afloat. And if you're constantly making us unhappy, if you're going against us with every single little decision, then eventually Pokemon Go is just going to die out. Because, yeah, no one is raiding. So how is Niantic making all their money? I feel like it's all Pokemon Go Fest at this point. Like, the only way they're making money is from in-app purchases with special tickets and with special events. Because aside of that, I don't see anyone actually doing raid battles. And that is definitely a bad sign for Pokemon Go right now. So yeah, hopefully Niantic will get their act together. Hopefully they'll start seeing a lot of the things that we're saying regarding remote raid passes, because it's been almost a year and a half since they nerfed remote raids, and Pokemon Go is definitely seeing a decline, and I'm really concerned about that. But yeah, in any case, that's going to be it for this video. Again, I don't want to be negative for the sake of being negative, so I would like to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Do you feel like there is something that Niantic could do to alleviate a lot of these issues? And if you completely disagree with me and you think the game is in a good place, I would like to know why as well. Let's have a great discussion, because I do think that this is a very divisive topic. There's certainly players out there who are enjoying Pokemon Go as it currently is, and I would like to get your opinions. And yeah, let's all be nice. Let's all share our opinions and have a great discussion in the comments. And yeah, and thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this discussion video. If you ended up enjoying it and found it to be insightful, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Pokemon Go content just like this one. And don't forget that little bell for notifications for when I upload videos. And I want to give a shout out to every single patron on my Patreon. You all make this channel content possible. If you want to support the contents of the channel and everything that I'm doing on this channel, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon, because if you become a paid Patreon member, not only are you supporting my channel, you are also going to get a permanent spot on my in-game Pokemon Go friends list. So when it comes to playing Pokemon Go together, like with remote raids or the friendship system, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon. And if you want to support my channel in a different way, you could always do so by following me on social media. It's completely free. All you have to do is go to the platforms that you see down below, follow me at Jinsula, and we can interact together there. And yeah, that's going to be it for this video. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, have yourself a great weekend, and I'll catch you all later.